I was staring at my own birthday cake when the words hit me like a hammer. "You're not my real father." In that moment, everything I had built, every sacrifice, every ounce of love, was stripped away in front of strangers. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. It can come from the very people you gave your life to. And sometimes, it's that wound, deep and raw, that forces you to uncover truths you never imagined. Before we dive in, if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you hit that button and turn on the bell so you never miss another health tip made just for you. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. I turned 69 the morning the rain fell in that steady Portland way, misting the air more than soaking it. Retirement had slowed me down, but it hadn't dulled the rhythm of my hands. Even without a workshop, I still found myself tinkering in the garage, oiling old tools, pretending I had another engine to fix. Once upon a time, I ran a small metal fabrication shop on the east side. I built railings, custom brackets, the kind of things no one noticed until they were gone. I sold it 3 years ago after Marilyn passed, using the money to clear debts and help my son Mason chase his big ideas. I told myself that was what fathers did. Hand over their years so their children could run faster with lighter loads. Marilyn's death left a silence in the house that I never learned to fill. She had been the steady one, the person who pushed me to see the world as more than nuts and bolts. When cancer took her, Mason and his wife Tessa became my only family left. I thought they would draw me in, but often I felt like a visitor who had overstayed his welcome. They invited me to holidays, birthdays, the occasional dinner, yet I never shook the sense that my chair was an afterthought. Mason is 35 now, all ambition and restless energy. He speaks the language of investors and markets the way I once spoke torque and horsepower. He wears tailored shirts, drives a car with more computers than gears, and tells me about scaling fast. I never understood half of what he meant, but I was proud in my quiet way. Tessa is different. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue, and a talent for turning a dinner table into a boardroom. She always treated me politely, but her politeness carried the weight of distance. She didn't argue, didn't insult, just slid me to the margins with a smile that said she was too busy for sentiment. My best friend Eddie Morales balanced it out. Eddie and I met 40 years ago when he was a beat cop patrolling my block. He's retired too, now working as a night guard. We still meet at the diner 3 mornings a week, drinking bitter coffee and laughing about the way our bones creak louder than the chairs. He reminds me that life can still be simple, even when the world tries to complicate it. I thought about Eddie as I buttoned my best shirt that evening. Mason had offered, insisted, that my birthday be held at his house. He called it more convenient for everyone. I drove across town with the pocket watch of my father in a small wooden box beside me. That watch had measured decades of sweat and labor. Tonight, I wanted to give it to Mason, a symbolic transfer from one generation to the next. Maybe he wouldn't treasure it the way I did, but maybe he would see the gesture. Maybe he would understand what it meant for me to hand it over. The house buzzed with music and laughter when I arrived. Strings of lights hung across the backyard, glowing against the damp air. Mason's colleagues filled most of the seats, talking shop in words that swirled past me like smoke. The birthday cake sat on a table, tall and perfect, with frosting that looked machine spread. People clapped and sang happy birthday in a way that felt more rehearsed than heartfelt. I smiled anyway, nodding, thanking them, trying not to notice how the party wasn't really for me. It was another networking event wearing a birthday hat. Inside the living room, I noticed the walls lined with framed photos. Mason on stage at conferences, Mason shaking hands with investors, Mason with Tessa in matching suits. My eyes searched for a trace of Marilyn, for our wedding photo, or even a snapshot of the 3 of us at the coast. Nothing. Our history had been replaced by his brand. I swallowed the ache, told myself not to dwell on it. When the crowd settled, I placed the wooden box on the table near Mason's plate. My fingers lingered on the smooth lid, heart thumping. I imagined him opening it, his face softening, his hand closing around mine. Just 1 word, maybe 2. Thanks, Dad. That was all I wanted. The weight of almost 7 decades felt lighter when I thought of hearing that. I sat down, waiting, pretending the laughter around me included me. My heart kept returning to the watch, to the hope that tonight Mason would see not just the gift, but the man who offered it. I told myself that people change, that sometimes children come around later than we expect. Perhaps tonight, on this milestone birthday, he would surprise me. For now, I chose to believe. Hope, even fragile, was better than nothing. If you're still watching and felt the weight of those first painful moments, comment number 1 below so I know you're here. Now, let's step into chapter 2. The dinner table should have felt warm, but the glow of the backyard lights only highlighted the distance between us. Mason lifted his glass, the polished stem catching the light, and tapped it with a spoon. His voice carried over the chatter, confident and smooth the way he always sounded when pitching to investors. Here's to family, to blood that never lies, to legacy that carries forward. The words struck me harder than the wine. They weren't meant as a toast to me, they were a subtle correction, a reminder that my place had limits. People laughed politely, raised their glasses, and clinked crystal. I forced a smile, telling myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded, but the air chilled around me. Tessa moved like a conductor at a symphony, directing who sat where, arranging plates, nudging people into conversations. When Eddie appeared at the gate, carrying a small gift bag, her smile didn't falter, but her words sliced gently. "It's a family-only dinner tonight. I'm sure Len will explain later." Eddie looked at me, brows furrowed, but he didn't argue. He handed me the bag anyway, a baseball cap from our favorite team, and muttered, "Catch up tomorrow, buddy." My cheeks burned as I nodded. Watching him walk back to his car, I felt a piece of my backbone leave with him. I returned to my seat at the far end of the table, where Tessa had placed me. She said it was quieter here, more comfortable, but I knew the truth. I was boxed in with the catering trays, removed from the center where Mason's colleagues sat laughing at his stories. My wooden box with the pocket watch had been moved, almost hidden beneath a pile of glossy brochures. I could see only the edge of the lid sticking out. I wanted to reach for it, to pull it back to the center, but my hands felt heavy. As the main course was served, Mason leaned back in his chair, speaking about investors who want unity and presenting one clear family line. His eyes kept flicking toward me as though I were a loose thread in the fabric he was trying to display. I asked him about his new project, trying to bridge the gap, but he waved me off with a vague answer. "It's complicated, Dad. Not really dinner talk." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Investors like to see clarity, heritage, you know how it is." I laughed softly, pretending I understood, but my stomach twisted. I noticed something strange when I excused myself to the bathroom and passed Mason's office. The door was slightly open, papers scattered across the desk. The top sheet bore a bold heading, Cascade Trust, with another phrase just beneath, Springing Clause. I froze, reading those words, feeling an unease I couldn't name. Trusts and clauses weren't part of my world. I told myself it was Mason's business, but the sight lingered in my head like a shadow you can't shake. When I returned, Tessa slid a house key across the table toward me. "You must have forgotten this earlier," she said lightly. My heart jolted. I remembered putting that key in my wallet before leaving the house. Now, here it was, lying like evidence in front of strangers. I slipped it back into my pocket with a shaky smile, whispering, "Thanks." But inside, a question screamed, how had she gotten it? The evening pressed on, laughter flowing around me like water I couldn't touch. I stared at the cake, the candles already extinguished, frosting smudged where someone had cut ahead. My gift, my watch, stayed buried under brochures no one cared to move. My chest tightened as I realized I was the only one waiting for something meaningful to happen. Every so often, I caught Mason watching me, not with warmth, but with calculation. His jaw tightened when our eyes met, as if weighing whether I was an asset or a liability. I shifted in my seat, trying to convince myself that maybe the toast had been careless wording, that Eddie's dismissal was just poor timing, that the key had fallen somehow. I wanted desperately to believe these things were accidents, not signs. But accidents don't line up so neatly. I clasped my hands together to stop them from trembling. At 69, I shouldn't have felt like a schoolboy waiting for approval, But I did. All I needed was for Mason to open that box, hold the watch, and call me Dad with pride. Just one word would steady the storm building inside me. Instead, Mason stood up again. He cleared his throat, a sound sharp enough to cut through every laugh and whisper. The room quieted. He placed both hands on the table, eyes sweeping the guests before landing squarely on me. My breath caught in my chest. I braced myself, hoping against reason that this was the moment he would finally give me the words I had waited for all night. If you're still watching and sensing the storm building, drop a number 2 in the comments so I know you're with me. Now let's move into Chapter 3. The sound of Mason clearing his throat still echoes in my chest like a wrench dropped onto concrete. He placed both hands on the table, leaned forward, and spoke with a sharp clarity that froze every conversation around him. It's time we stop pretending. Len, you're not my real father. You never were. And tonight, at 69, it's time you understood you don't belong here. His words sliced through the night air sharper than any blade I'd ever held in my workshop. For the first time in my life, my son didn't call me Dad. He called me by my name, reducing decades of sacrifice to nothing. The clinking of glasses ceased, forks hovered midair. The laughter that had filled the yard only minutes ago vanished, replaced by the uneasy shuffle of people adjusting in their chairs. Someone gasped, another coughed, but mostly there was silence. It was the kind of silence that follows a blow so brutal, no one knows whether to cheer or recoil. My ears rang with it. Tessa stood almost theatrically, as though rehearsed. From behind her chair, she pulled out a navy duffel bag and set it on the ground beneath me. The zipper was half open, revealing my folded flannel shirt, the razor from my bathroom, and even the slippers I kept by my bed. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a sudden burst of anger. It was premeditated, planned with the precision of an eviction notice. The humiliation seared my skin because they hadn't just talked about this, they had prepared for it, waiting for the moment to strike. I tried to form words, but my mouth felt full of dust. "Mason," I whispered, my voice breaking like brittle steel, "why are you doing this?" He didn't flinch. He looked at me the way a man looks at an outdated machine, one that's been useful but is no longer worth the space it takes up. "You've lived off me long enough. I put food on your plate. I gave you a roof. But you're not my blood, Len. You never will be." The way he said Len, again, twisted deeper than any insult. I had carried him on my shoulders through county fairs, stood through school plays, cheered at baseball games, worked overtime to buy his first car. Yet all of it had been erased with one declaration. I was not his blood. At the far end of the yard, Eddie shifted. His chair scraped against the deck, and I saw him push himself up, fists balled, jaw set. His eyes burned with the kind of anger only a true friend can feel when someone they love is humiliated. For a moment, I wanted him to lunge across the table, to put his fist into Mason's smug certainty. But then I raised my hand, stopping him. This was my battle, and if I let it turn into a fight, I'd lose more than dignity. Eddie froze, shoulders tense, and sank back into his chair, though his chest rose and fell like a man restraining fire. The birthday cake still sat on the table, candles melted into crooked wax puddles. It looked absurd now, a relic of celebration at a funeral of family. I stared at it and thought of Marilyn. She would have stood between us, forced Mason to see the truth, or at least made him soften his voice. Without her, there was no buffer, no shield, just me, stripped of every defense. My hand found the pocket watch in my coat, the smooth surface pressed against my palm, cold and grounding. I had planned to give it to Mason tonight, to pass it down as a symbol of lineage, not of blood, but of love and responsibility. Now it felt foolish. What good was an heirloom to a son who had already disowned me? I gripped it tighter, knowing it was all I had left of my father, of my identity as one. No one moved to stop me as I bent to pick up the duffel bag. The straps dug into my hand, heavier than they should have been. I lifted my head just long enough to meet Mason's eyes. They were hard, unflinching, daring me to argue. I didn't. What words could I muster that would change him now? He had chosen his truth, and in that truth, I was no father. I walked slowly toward the gate, the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes echoing like the toll of a bell. Behind me, the lights glowed warm, laughter beginning to trickle back in soft, awkward bursts as though to patch the hole Mason had torn open. The house loomed, bright and busy, while I stepped into the night like a shadow no one would miss. Rain began to fall again, heavier this time, soaking my shoulders and hair within seconds. I clutched the duffel bag in one hand, the pocket watch in the other, and let the water hide the tears sliding down my face. I had always imagined 69 would find me telling stories to grandchildren, not trudging away from my son's house as an unwanted guest. At 69, I had been turned into a stranger in my own family. If you're still watching and shocked by the betrayal that unfolded, type number 3 below to show me you're following along. Now let's dive into chapter 4. The rain hadn't stopped since I left Mason's house. It drummed on the roof of my old sedan as I sat in the driver's seat with the duffel bag on the passenger side. I stared at my hands gripping the wheel, knuckles white, wondering how my own son had managed to turn me into a stranger on the night I should have been celebrated. My first instinct was to call someone who could steady me, so I dialed Marjorie, the attorney who once helped me when Marilyn passed. The line rang to voicemail. "Our office hours are 9 to 5, the message reminded me, calm and useless. I tried the bank next. Same result. I cursed softly, the sound swallowed by the rain. I drove aimlessly, finally steering toward my little house in East Portland. It was supposed to be my refuge, the one place Mason couldn't taint, but when I slid the key into the lock, it refused to turn. I jiggled it, pressed harder, pulled back, tried again. Nothing. The deadbolt was new. A neighbor stepped onto her porch, umbrella overhead, and called out, "Locksmith was here earlier today. Your son authorized it." The words hit me like a hammer. My son had shut me out of my own home before even confronting me. The betrayal had been in motion long before tonight. I stumbled back to the car, rain soaking through my coat. Inside, I tore open the glove compartment and rummaged for the manila envelopes where I kept copies of my mortgage and insurance. They were empty. Not misplaced, empty. As if someone had carefully removed the contents and left only shells. I gripped at the steering wheel again, trembling. Memory betrayed me. Had I given Mason access while recovering from hip surgery? I remembered signing stacks of papers he placed before me. "Just routine, Dad," he'd said. I had trusted him, my only child. I pulled out my health insurance card. The address listed wasn't mine anymore. It was Mason's. I turned it over and over, rain dripping from my sleeve, hoping I had misread, but there it was, printed in black and white. My identity had been shifted, redirected, like mail rerouted to a new owner. My stomach churned. I felt like a man who had built a machine carefully piece by piece, only to discover someone had swapped its parts until it no longer belonged to him. For a wild second, I thought about marching back to Mason's house, ringing the bell until he was forced to face me. But in my mind, I saw the image, me on his porch, soaked and shaking, while the doorbell camera recorded every second of my humiliation. Tessa would watch from behind the curtains, satisfied, while Mason ignored me. The thought alone was enough to keep me in the car. Pride was a thin shield, but it was all I had left. I drove to the river instead. The Willamette shimmered with the reflection of streetlights, each ripple distorting the glow into trembling lines. I parked beneath the bridge, killed the engine, and sat with my breathing ragged. I counted heartbeats, trying to calm the thundering inside my chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. By 20, my pulse slowed, but not enough. The duffel bag sat beside me like evidence of exile, and the pocket watch pressed into my palm, the last anchor to who I was. For a while, I simply listened to the rain strike the windshield. It reminded me of welding sparks, sharp and relentless, eating away at the edges of something once solid. I wondered if this was how a structure felt before collapse, straining, groaning, but unable to stop the break. Headlights swept across the inside of my car. A vehicle slowed, tires hissing on wet pavement, and stopped alongside me. My chest tightened. At this hour, in this place, strangers rarely meant good news. The car was sleek and black, its windows tinted. I considered starting my engine, but before I could, the passenger side window of the sedan rolled down. A woman leaned out. She looked to be in her 50s, her face calm but purposeful. "Mr. Hargrove," she called over the rain. "I'm Harper Quinn from Cascade Trust. Please, come with me. We need to talk tonight." Her tone was firm, not threatening, and carried a weight that told me she knew more than she was saying. The name, Cascade Trust, sent a jolt through me. It was the same heading I had glimpsed on Mason's desk earlier. My breath caught. I hesitated, staring at her, at the glowing dashboard lights, at the raindrops streaking down glass like tears. Every instinct screamed caution, yet another voice inside whispered that perhaps this was the only chance I'd get to understand what was really happening. I opened the door, stepped into the rain, and slid into the back seat of the sedan. The door closed behind me with a soft thud, sealing out the storm. If you're still watching and the tension has you hooked, leave a number 4 in the comments so I know you're here. Now, let's uncover what happens in Chapter 5. The morning after my exile, I found myself sitting at a long oak table in Marjorie Kemp's office. Papers lay spread out in neat stacks, though to me they looked like fragments of a life I no longer recognized. Harper Quinn, calm and efficient, slid each document across to me in turn. Change of locks, initiated under M. Hargrove, utility address transfers. Bank authorizations tied to a power of attorney I vaguely remembered signing in the hospital. Every sheet carried my name but someone else's intent. My hands shook as I held them, yet there was a strange relief in finally seeing proof that I hadn't lost my mind. Eddie arrived late, rain dripping from his jacket, eyes blazing. He carried a small USB stick. "Got this from a neighbor's doorbell cam," he said, setting it down like a bullet. Harper plugged it into her laptop, and there it was, grainy footage of me holding that duffel bag while Mason's voice cut through the static. "He's not my father. He doesn't belong here." The words were clear enough for any judge to hear. My chest tightened again, but this time not with shame, with resolve. Harper leaned forward, folding her hands. "The bank has already flagged suspicious activity. Several transfers from accounts linked to the trust were funneled into shell ventures under Mason's control. We've frozen them for now." Her tone was steady, matter of fact, but I could see a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She wasn't just managing finances, she was defending me. Marjorie tapped a thick binder. "Here's what we'll do. The trust Marilyn established includes what's called a springing clause. It activates if you, as primary beneficiary, are excluded or abused by a family member. Mason triggered it the moment he threw you out. Legally, you retain full control over the assets." I sat back, stunned. For the first time since that night, I felt ground beneath me. They weren't just fighting for me, they were showing me I still had rights, still had power. By midday, we drove together to Mason's house. The neighborhood was alive with weekend routines, kids riding bikes, sprinklers hissing over lawns. As we walked up the path, blends twitched. Everyone had seen the spectacle the night before. Now, they would see what came after. Tessa answered the door. Her smile was tight, professional, the kind that never reached the eyes. Behind her, Mason stood stiff, arms crossed. His face betrayed no warmth, only irritation at the intrusion. For once, there were no guests, no colleagues to impress, just us. Marjorie spoke first, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. "Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove, under the authority of the Cascade Trust and Oregon law, we are here to inform you that Leonard Hargrove retains full control of his estate. The locks you changed must be restored, his belongings returned immediately, and all unauthorized transactions will be audited. Failure to comply will result in legal action." Mason scoffed, his lips curling. "Bloodline matters more than paper. He's not my real father. Biology doesn't lie." I wanted to shout, to remind him of scraped knees I'd bandaged, of nights I'd stayed awake when he was sick, of every wrench I'd tightened to keep our lives together. Instead, I reached into my coat and placed the pocket watch on the dining table between us. The silver glinted in the afternoon light. My voice came low but steady. "If you pick it up, Mason, you'll feel 3 generations ticking inside. That's legacy, not just blood, but responsibility." He didn't move. Tessa's hand twitched toward it, then pulled back as if the watch burned. Silence stretched. Marjorie broke it. She pulled a small device from her briefcase and pressed play. Marilyn's voice filled the room, clear, recorded in those final months before cancer took her. Any child of mine who denies Len as their father before others will forfeit all claim to this trust. Blood may argue, but law and love do not. Len is, and always will be, the father of this family. The words hung heavy, undeniable. Mason's face paled, his jaw working without sound. Tessa turned away, biting her lip. For me, it was like hearing Marilyn step back into the room, her strength woven into every syllable. I stood straighter than I had in years. The watch ticked on the table, steady and sure, as if agreeing with her. Mason had stripped me of dignity on my birthday, but Marilyn's voice had given it back in front of him. Back in my kitchen, the rain tapped gently against the window panes, softer now than the storm that had swallowed me the night before. The four of us sat around the oak table, Harper with her neat folders, Marjorie with her thick binder of statutes, Eddie with his arms folded and his eyes restless. A pot of coffee steamed between us, its bitter scent filling the room. I felt both surrounded and strangely alone, the weight of every decision pressing on my shoulders. Marjorie spoke first, firm and practical. You have grounds to press criminal charges for fraud, Len. Elder financial abuse, misuse of power of attorney, unauthorized transfers, it's all here. She tapped the binder. If you file now, the law will move quickly. Mason and Tessa would be forced to account for every action. Harper leaned forward, calm but equally sharp. The trust is already on your side. Mason triggered the springing clause when he excluded you. If you want, we can enforce immediate removal of his access. He loses everything tied to Cascade Trust, permanently. She paused as though weighing her words. It's clean. It protects you absolutely. Eddie shook his head, his voice rough. Clean maybe, but not painless. You cut him off like that, it'll haunt you, Len. I've seen men win in court and still wake up every night wondering if they did right by their kids. Mason doesn't deserve your pity, but you have to decide if you can live with shutting the door forever. Their words swirled inside me like the coffee steam. My mind drifted backward, Mason at 6 years old, riding on my shoulders at the county fair, his small hands clutching my hair as he laughed. The joy in his voice had been so pure, I thought I'd carry it with me forever. Now that memory felt like it belonged to someone else. I thought of the man who had stood across from me yesterday, sneering, calling me by my first name, discarding nearly 70 years of fatherhood with a shrug. The boy I remembered and the man he'd become collided inside me, tearing me in two. Part of me longed for the clean cut Marjorie and Harper described. To sever the tie, lock the doors, let the law be my shield. No more games, no more wounds, just peace. But the peace felt hollow in my imagination, like an empty garage after the tools had been sold. Justice, yes, but justice that left me alone in silence. Another part of me resisted. I couldn't ignore the years, however twisted the end had become. Maybe it was weakness, or maybe it was love. Either way, something in me insisted on leaving a path, however narrow, for Mason to return. Not as a conqueror, not as an unrepentant son, but as a man willing to admit wrong. The chance might never come, but if I closed it entirely, I'd lose not only my son, but the last thread of myself that still believed in him. I looked at the three of them, their eyes waiting for me to choose. My voice came quiet but steady. I won't abandon him. But I will abandon the way he treats me. I'll protect myself first. Then, if he ever finds the strength to come back, there will be conditions. Harper nodded, already reaching for a pen. We'll draft it as a formal notice. Restitution, apology, counseling, audit oversight. He ignores it, we move forward with litigation. Marjorie added, it will show the court that you acted reasonably, offered reconciliation. That strengthens your position no matter what he chooses. Eddie leaned back, arms crossed, but a faint smile flickered on his lips. That sounds like you, Len. Tough enough to stand, soft enough to still be a father. Together we drafted the letter. Every word became both shield and invitation. The return of my property, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, participation in family therapy, and acceptance of financial audits. If Mason complied, the door remained open. If not, the law would close it for good. By evening, Harper delivered the document to Mason's attorney. I made one more gesture. I picked up my phone, thumb shaking as I pressed record. My voice was low but clear. "I'm not giving up on you, son. But I won't live this way anymore." I ended the message before my throat broke. Later that night, Tessa's email arrived. Cold, clipped, 5 lines long. "Our lawyer will be in touch." No warmth, no recognition, just strategy. I read it once, then closed my laptop. For the first time since my birthday, I didn't feel powerless. I had drawn a line, not slammed a door. If you're still watching and feeling the weight of the choices ahead, comment number 5 to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to Chapter 7. Weeks slid by, marked not by celebration or family, but by paperwork, meetings, and long nights staring at the ceiling. The storm Mason unleashed on my 69th birthday didn't end with that cruel toast. It spread, seeping into banks, offices, and even whispers among neighbors. Yet each day I felt a little steadier, less like a man cast out and more like a man reclaiming ground 1 inch at a time. Harper visited twice a week, arms full of folders. She showed me letters from the bank confirming freezes on accounts Mason had touched. Transfers routed through shell companies in Tessa's name were flagged for fraud. "They're trapped," Harper said, her calm tone like steel wrapped in velvet. "They can't keep moving your money." The investigation has teeth. Her assurance became a rope I held onto when doubts tried to pull me under. Eddie came by with proof of his own. He set his phone on my table, hit play, and there it was again. Mason's voice captured on a neighbor's doorbell camera. "He's not my father. He doesn't belong here." The words hurt as much as the first time, but now they were evidence, not just daggers. Eddie leaned back in his chair. "This isn't just memory, Len. You've got their cruelty recorded. No one can gaslight you out of it." Meanwhile, Mason's perfect image began to crumble. A small investor Harper knew called her in a panic. Word had leaked that Mason's family trust was under legal dispute. In his world of polished suits and crafted reputations, the rumor of instability was poison. By the end of the month, 2 partners had quietly pulled out. I didn't gloat, but I noted the irony. He had tried to erase me for the sake of appearances, and now appearances were erasing him. I began therapy on Harper's suggestion. The counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Clara, specialized in older adults dealing with psychological abuse. At first, I resisted. I thought therapy was for people weaker than me. But one session in, when she asked me to name what I felt, the words tumbled out like loose bolts: betrayal, grief, anger, humiliation. Saying them aloud loosened their grip. Each week I left her office a little taller, a little less burdened by the shame Mason had shoved onto me. Not all the news came wrapped in justice. One night, my phone lit up with Mason's number. I let it ring to voicemail, then pressed play with trembling fingers. His voice was slurred, heavy with drink. "Dad," he started, then stopped. A pause stretched, filled with static, before he muttered something I couldn't make out. The message ended without apology, without clarity. I didn't call back. Another time, Tessa emailed a proposal. If I agreed to stop pursuing the trust enforcement, they would return select belongings of mine. Harper read it, scoffed, and sent back 2 words. "Request denied." I agreed. Mercy could not be bargained with like spare furniture. Instead, I focused on rebuilding the corners of life they hadn't managed to take. I cleared the dust from my garage, set up a new workbench, and hung my tools in neat rows again. The smell of oil and wood glue filled the space, steady and familiar. I placed my father's pocket watch in a small glass case above the bench. It no longer waited for Mason, it waited for no one. It was mine, a reminder that legacy was earned by care, not demanded by blood. Each morning I walked across the steel bridge, watching the Willamette flow beneath, steady and indifferent, the water no longer mirrored my despair but carried it away, leaving me lighter with each crossing. I read old manuals at night, scribbled notes like I was back in trade school, reminding myself that my mind was still sharp, my hands still capable. Then came Eddie's discovery. He burst into my kitchen one afternoon with a folder clutched in his hand. "Look what I dug up," he said, spreading papers across the table. My eyes widened. It was an adoption document, signed when Mason was a child, my name inked clearly as his legal father. Alongside it, Eddie laid down a photograph of Marilyn outside the courthouse, holding Mason in her arms, both of them smiling at me just beyond the frame. I traced the raised seal on the paper with my fingertip. This wasn't memory or sentiment or hope. This was law. This was truth carved into record, beyond the reach of denial. Mason could scream, "Not my father," until his voice broke, but the courts, the state, and Marilyn herself had already declared otherwise. I leaned back, a slow smile tugging at the edges of my mouth for the first time in weeks. "Blood can be denied," I murmured, "but law and love cannot." Eddie grinned, clapped my shoulder, and for a moment the heaviness lifted. The consequences of Mason's betrayal had spread far and wide, but so had the proof of who I really was. And for the first time since my birthday, I felt not just steady, I felt strong. The first morning I woke up back in my own bed, with my own keys on the nightstand, felt almost surreal. The locks had been changed again, this time by a locksmith hired by me, under my authority, not Mason's. The house smelled faintly of sawdust from where Eddie had reinforced the front door, his way of making sure no one tampered with it again. Harper had spent hours on the phone with the bank and Cascade Trust. When she finally handed me a folder marked "Restored Access," I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for weeks. For the first time since my birthday, I felt like my life belonged to me again. Walking through each room was like reclaiming territory. I ran my hand across the mantel where Marilyn's photo once sat, now back in its rightful place. Her smile steadied me. In the living room, I found the quilt she had sewn years ago, tucked into a box Mason had tried to hide away. I draped it over the sofa, the house instantly warmer. Each heirloom restored was more than an object. It was a piece of memory, a fragment of love rescued from erasure. Eddie showed up the next day with a six-pack of cheap beer in his toolbox. Together we installed cameras, changed the locks again just to be certain, and sealed off the weak spots Mason had exploited. Sitting in the garage afterward, sipping the bitter beer, Eddie looked at me in the eye. "Survival isn't weakness, Len. It's proof you're stronger than they thought." His words settled into me, grounding me more than the alcohol ever could. Of course, Mason and Tessa didn't vanish quietly. Their attorney began sending letters, pages of denial, claims that I was confused, that the power of attorney was voluntarily executed. Tessa herself called one evening, her voice smooth as glass. "Leonard, let's be reasonable. We can compromise, keep this private. You don't want to drag the family name through mud, do you?" I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply told her, "All communication goes through Marjorie now," and hung up. It felt like slamming a door on years of manipulation. Therapy became a steady part of my week. Clara guided me through the tangle of emotions I had buried under anger and humiliation. One session, she asked me to finish the sentence. "I am..." My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "I am not broken. I was betrayed, but I am not broken." Saying it aloud shifted something inside me. Shame had no place here anymore. That night, I slept 6 hours straight for the first time since my birthday. Slowly, I started to redefine what family meant. I met Eddie at the diner, just like old times, where the waitress knew our orders by heart. I lingered longer with neighbors, fixing a leaky faucet for one, building a railing for another. A young mechanic from down the street asked if I'd show him how to tune an old carburetor. Teaching him reminded me that legacy doesn't require blood. It requires passing on what you know, offering time and patience. For the first time, I felt that maybe my fatherhood could stretch beyond Mason. In the garage, I set up a small shrine on a shelf above my workbench. My father's pocket watch lay there, not waiting for Mason anymore, but standing guard as a symbol. Beside it, I placed a photo of Marilyn holding Mason as a boy, and another of me at the workshop in my prim. It wasn't inheritance I was preserving, it was dignity. The continuity wasn't about who received it, but about what it represented: love, labor, and resilience. Days began to feel like mine again. I rose early, walked across the steel bridge, watched the river move unbothered beneath the steel beams. The city's rhythm returned to me: coffee at the corner diner, afternoons tinkering in the garage, evenings reading manuals or scribbling notes like a student again. Each small act was a step toward stitching my life back together. The legal battles weren't finished, and I knew Mason and Tessa would keep clawing at the edges. But I also knew they had already lost the deeper war. They had tried to take my dignity, my name, even my place in my own family. Yet here I stood, with my keys, my home, my watch, and my truth intact. I no longer needed Mason's approval to know who I was. I had survived his rejection, endured his betrayal, and reclaimed the right to define myself. And in that quiet victory, I discovered something greater than justice. I discovered freedom. If you're still watching and can see the path of healing take shape, type number 6 below so I know you're here. Now, let's continue with Chapter 9. When the court ruling finally came, it wasn't with fireworks or shouting gavel strikes. It was a quiet voice from the judge, words read into the record that carried the weight of everything Mason had tried to strip from me. Leonard Hargrove retains full authority over the Cascade Trust. Any and all claims by Mason and Tessa Hargrove are hereby denied. Just like that, the paper shield Mason had tried to wield against me crumbled into dust. Harper squeezed my shoulder as we walked out of the courthouse, Marjorie trailing behind with her binder hugged to her chest. Eddie was waiting outside, leaning against his truck with that crooked grin. "Told you justice doesn't forget the good guys," he said. I chuckled, the sound strange in my throat after so many weeks of holding it back. For once, the laughter didn't feel bitter. News spread fast. Mason's investors pulled out one by one, their money scurrying like rats leaving a sinking ship. The local paper ran a small story on financial irregularities at his firm. Careful not to mention names, but everyone in the neighborhood knew. At the diner, people stopped by my booth to clap me on the back. Even those who had once whispered about family troubles now spoke with respect, like I had survived a storm and come out the other side intact. At home, I walked slowly through each room, not as a victim cataloging losses, but as a man reclaiming a sanctuary. The walls no longer felt like contested ground. I rehung Marilyn's photo in the hallway, right where guests would see it first. Her smile lit the house more than any lamp. I smoothed my hand over the quilt on the sofa, the grooves of the wood banister, even the scuffs on the floor that once annoyed me. They were mine again, scars of a home that had endured. Eddie joined me that evening, a case of beer clinking in his arms. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. He raised his bottle. "To survival," he said. I raised mine back. "To chosen family." He grinned, eyes softer than usual. "Damn right." In that moment, I realized blood wasn't the only tie that mattered. Loyalty, friendship, and presence could weigh more than DNA ever did. Still, Mason lingered in my thoughts. His face the night he called me Len instead of Dad haunted me. The boy on my shoulders at the fair, the teenager learning to drive in my old truck, they were still there, frozen in memory. Grief twined with anger, but instead of crushing me, it sat like a stone in my pocket, heavy but carryable. If Mason ever found the courage to change, the door would remain cracked. But until then, he would walk the path he chose, and I would walk mine. That night, I placed the pocket watch on the table by my bed. For years, I had thought of it as something to pass down to Mason. Now, I understood it differently. It wasn't a gift waiting for an heir. It was a reminder that I had endured, that strength and dignity weren't his to take. The steady tick filled the silence, like my father's voice whispering across time, "Hold on, son. You're stronger than you know." The next morning, I walked across the steel bridge as I had so many times before. The Willamette glimmered below, calm after weeks of storm. Sunlight broke through thin clouds, gilding the water in gold. Each step felt lighter than the last. I paused halfway across, leaning against the rail, and let the breeze carry the scent of rain and city smoke. It no longer smelled of loss. It smelled of continuation. I closed my eyes and heard Marilyn's voice, not recorded this time, but living in memory. "You'll survive this, Len." "You always do," I smiled, the ache in my chest easing. She had been right. When I reached the far side of the bridge, I stopped and whispered aloud, "I was never unwanted. I was never broken. I am still here." The words weren't just defiance anymore. They were truth. And for the first time since my 69th birthday, I believed them. When I look back on that night, my 69th birthday, the cake still on the table, Mason's voice cutting me down with words sharper than steel, I no longer feel only the sting. The memory will always ache, but it no longer defines me. I remember the humiliation of carrying that duffel bag out into the rain, the door closing behind me like the end of a chapter. I remember the locks changed on my house, the papers missing, the sick confusion of wondering if I had somehow caused it all. But most of all, I remember the moment I chose not to collapse. That choice, more than anything, saved me. The battles that followed were not easy. Courtrooms, affidavits, trust clauses, endless signatures. I was tested in ways I never expected to be tested so late in life, but I did not face them alone. Harper stood beside me with her calm precision, Marjorie with her sharp legal mind, Eddie with his unwavering loyalty. Without them, I might have drowned in the tide Mason tried to unleash. With them, I learned that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it comes in the form of a steady hand on your shoulder, or a friend who refuses to let you quit. Therapy forced me to face truths I had avoided. I had to say the words aloud. Betrayal, grief, anger, humiliation. Naming them did not make me weak. It made me free. The shame was never mine to carry. It belonged to the ones who betrayed me. Learning that difference changed everything. What I came to understand is this: family is not measured by DNA. Blood is biology, nothing more. Family is loyalty. Family is love shown through presence and care. Eddie has been more of a son to me than Mason was in his coldest moments. My community, the neighbors who nodded to me on the bridge, the young mechanic eager to learn, all of them reminded me that bonds can be chosen, forged like steel, stronger than anything that breaks. There are lessons I want anyone who listens to this to carry. You cannot control another's choices. Mason chose greed and cruelty. Tessa chose manipulation. Those were their decisions, not mine. But you can control your boundaries. You can say, "This is where it ends. This is how I will be treated." Dignity must never be handed over, not even to those you love. Because if love demands your humiliation, it is not love at all. I also learned the value of caution. Trust should be given with both heart and eyes open. I signed papers when I was vulnerable, believing my son's words. I cannot change that. But I can teach others to guard themselves, to ensure love never blinds them to the possibility of betrayal. To those older than me who fear they are unwanted, you are not broken. Betrayal does not erase your worth. To those younger, honor the ones who gave you everything. Do not mistake sacrifice for weakness. It is the strongest thing a parent can do, and if forgiveness is ever possible, let it be tied to accountability, not to empty words. I do not know if Mason will ever change. He may live out his life bitter, angry that the law and his mother's voice turned against him. Or maybe one day, when the noise quiets, he will remember the man who carried him on his shoulders and realize what he threw away. If that day comes, I will listen, but I will not lower my guard. Forgiveness is a gift. It is not owed. Now my days are simple again. I wake with the sun, walk across the steel bridge, let the river remind me that storms pass. I tinker in the garage, the smell of oil and wood grounding me. On the shelf above my workbench sits my father's pocket watch, ticking steadily. Once, I thought of it as Mason's inheritance. Now, I see it differently. It is not waiting to be passed down. It is reminding me that endurance is its own legacy. Life's storms strip away illusions, but they leave behind truth. Love that is real outlasts betrayal. Self-respect is the foundation of peace. I know that now with a certainty I did not have before. And so, if you ever find yourself where I was, unwanted, discarded, told you are nothing, remember this: you are not broken. You are still here, and that, my friend, is enough. Life has a way of testing the strength of its foundations. Sometimes those tests come quietly, through the passing of time and the erosion of trust. Other times, they arrive suddenly, like a storm that strips away the walls we thought would always protect us. What remains after such storms is rarely comfortable, but it is often the truest measure of who we are. When betrayal cuts close to the bone, it shakes more than just confidence. It unsettles identity. To be cast aside or told you are unwanted is not just an insult. It is an attempt to erase years of devotion, history, and sacrifice. Yet those attempts, no matter how sharp, cannot truly rewrite what has already been lived. The truth of loyalty, of effort given, of love invested cannot be erased by denial. They remain part of the fabric of existence, even when others pretend otherwise. The journey after such betrayal is not simple. There are nights filled with anger, days clouded by confusion, and long moments of silence where one wonders whether dignity can ever be reclaimed. But within those moments lies a choice. The choice to collapse under the weight of cruelty or to stand and claim the right to be respected. That choice is not about pride. It is about survival, and ultimately, about freedom. Freedom comes not from revenge or punishment alone, but from the decision to no longer let another's rejection define one's worth. The power lies in drawing boundaries, in saying with quiet certainty, "This is how I will be treated. Anything less, I will not accept." Such clarity is not born overnight. It is carved through pain, therapy, the support of loyal friends, and the rediscovery of simple joys that remind us who we were before the betrayal. In that rediscovery, an essential truth emerges. Family is not a matter of blood alone. Biology can connect, but it cannot guarantee loyalty. True family reveals itself in presence, in consistency, in the hands that help rebuild when everything has been torn down. It may be found in friends who refuse to abandon, in neighbors who step forward with kindness, in communities that remind us we are not invisible. Family, in its deepest sense, is chosen as much as it is inherited. The lesson is both sobering and liberating. One cannot control the choices of others. Betrayal, greed, cruelty, these are paths some will take regardless of the love they were given. But one can control how much power those choices hold. Self-respect must be defended like a fortress. Trust must be given with eyes open, not blindly. And forgiveness, if it ever comes, should never be confused with permission. Still, amid the hardness of these lessons, hope remains. Pain may narrow the world, but healing opens it again. Through reflection, through patience, through steady acts of rebuilding, life resumes. The symbols of endurance, an heirloom watch, a familiar bridge, a well-worn workshop, become reminders that storms pass and dignity can be restored. What was lost in illusion is often replaced with something stronger: truth, clarity, resilience. In the end, betrayal does not have the final word. Survival does. And survival is not just breathing. It is reclaiming the right to define life on one's own terms. It is choosing joy in small routines, choosing love in unexpected places, choosing to believe that worth is never diminished by another's rejection. So, the reflection is simple yet profound. No matter how deep the wound, no matter how sharp the rejection, you are not broken. To endure is to win. To reclaim dignity is to heal. And to still stand, after all else has fallen away, is proof that you are enough. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.